The GOAT has officially hung it up. Nick Saban retiring from college football head coaching as he announced late yesterday afternoon his retirement as Alabama Crimson Tide head football coach. Guys, it's the irony of this is just a couple days ago, I go on that SEC podcast with Michael Bratton, and he asked me point blank, Chris, what are your thoughts on Nick Saban retiring? When is it going to happen? Do you want him to retire? What do you think the ripple effect will be in the SEC and college football? And I mentioned to Mike that I didn't see it happening right now, right? But I thought, of course, right, we were on the back nine, if you will. Within the next 5 years or so, we'd probably see Nick Saban call it a career. I thought he'd most likely run it back, had most of his team, his Alabama team, coming back next year. Jalen Milroe already announced that he was returning. And so I figured, you know what? At minimum, we're going to get Nick Saban back in 2024. He's going to make one more run at this thing because 12-team playoff, Bama was going to get in. They're going to get in, no doubt. And he's going to have a great opportunity to, at minimum, get back to a national championship game. Before we dive into, guys, because I got a lot of thoughts on the why of this and just overall feelings, what it means for college football, for Alabama, obviously. Let's take a moment to look back on the numbers and really pay tribute to the greatness that was and is Nick Saban. He's the greatest of all time, guys. There's never been a greater college football coach than Nick Saban. And we're talking like Bear Bryant. Like, you go down the list, guys. And Bear Bryant was fantastic. But for Nick Saban to do what he did in the modern era of college football, it's unlike anything we've ever seen and more than likely will ever see. Nick Saban by the numbers, guys. And this includes his stints at Bama, LSU, and Michigan State. 7 national championships. Guys, he won 6 at Alabama. The only coach ever to win 3 national titles, or win national titles, in 3 different decades. Think about how crazy that is alone. 11 SEC championships. 292 wins. Good enough for 6th all time. 201 wins at Alabama. Second most at a single school in SEC history. He also won the MAC. Who knew? He won the MAC. 9 wins against AP number 1 teams. The most ever. 9 wins against number 1s. 104 wins against AP ranked teams. Most ever. 109 weeks ranked number 1 in the AP poll at Alabama, more than any school all time. Guys, 16 straight 10-win seasons. The longest ever. 19 bowl wins. That's 3rd all time. 49 first-round draft picks. Most all time. Guys, Nick Saban had more first-round draft picks than he did losses. And also made the college football playoff 8 of 10 years. And guys, honestly, I just ran through those numbers. The numbers don't do justice of his greatness and what he meant, especially to Alabama football. Guys, here's how I think you know you're starting to get old. I'm old enough to remember when Alabama sucked at football. You're like, wow, you must be ancient. I'm old enough to remember when Alabama stunk at football, right? I can think back to 2004 when a South Carolina Gamecocks team that was a 6-win ball club, wasn't very good, wasn't exceptional, went into Tuscaloosa and beat the Crimson Tide. I think the final score was like 24-3. I'll never forget the shot of Bama fans leaving the game early. Like, Alabama football was not good at that time. I remember Bama not being very good. And Nick Saban takes over. They have that rough first season, right? Lose to La Monroe. From then on, Our entire lifetimes have been Alabama football being dominant. And it's because of Nick Saban. I mean, that's the craziest part, guys. When you think about Saban's tenure at Alabama, like, they didn't have a down year. A down year for Alabama was winning 10 games. That was a down year. They never had a year in which, they went 8-4 or 9-3, inexplicably missed on a quarterback or missed on this, missed on that. They always found a way to be dominant. And they were that. From the recruiting aspect to on the field to Nick Saban, evolving with the times and staying ahead of everything and being this sort of lord of college football, really, truly. Now, as I mentioned, it was a bit of a surprise. It's a surprise and it's not. You know what I mean? It's a surprise and it's not, because I really thought Nick Saban, that ending to his career doesn't feel right. Like, it really doesn't. And I know Michigan fans are taking great joy and great glee in how this Nick Saban tenure has ended. And Michigan fans feel like they knocked Nick Saban out of college football. But I've got reasons why, I think. More on that in a second. But, we knew we were getting closer to this day, right? We knew that this day was sooner rather than later. We were nearing this point. And I mentioned on Mike's show a couple days ago, guys, that when it happened, it was going to be a bit of a shocker for us all, right? It wasn't going to be one of those things where, okay, this makes perfect sense. This is the time. Nick, it's time for you to leave. And that is certainly the case with it happening right now. I mean, again, guys, you can't say enough good things about Nick Saban's dominance. Like, just like what he's done. I mean, you go back to LSU, guys. He turned LSU into what they are now. LSU, he brought the first title to LSU back in 2003. I recall those teams. All Nick Saban ever did was win. I mean, and you know what, too, guys? He did it the right way. Did it clean. Like, there never was any scandal or this, that. Of course, there's the jokes of giving recruits chargers or what have. Like, I totally get it, man. Like, it's, you're going to be scrutinized and you're going to be highly criticized when you are the very best at what you do, right? There's going to be people that are jealous, they're envious, it's just the nature of the beast, right? We all cheer for someone on the way up, and when they get to that pinnacle, many people do their very best to pull them down and come back down to my reality, right? I don't like the way you do things, what have you. So, but the only reason folks hated Nick Saban is because of how great he was and how great he is. And so it is a surprise. It is for it to happen now. I really thought the 2024 Crimson Tide team had a chance. Way too early predictions and way too early head coach rankings. Guys, I guess they were way too early. I guess they were way too early, right? Because now Nick Saban's not even there anymore, and who knows what Bama's going to be. I mean, I had Bama 11-1. I thought this team with Milroe coming back and a lot of that young talent returning, Nick Saban returning. Kevin Steele had just retired, but it's Nick Saban, man. He's going to go out there and get whoever he wants, and that guy's going to run Nick Saban's defense, and they're going to be just fine, right? They're going to be just fine. They always have been. That's another thing, guys. The fact Nick Saban, you look at his coaching tree. Like, when you talk about his legacy, it's so much more than just he did on the field with his teams. Look at the coaching tree, guys. Look at the amount of guys who are head coaches right now that learned under Nick Saban. Kirby Smart, the most notable. Steve Sarkisian, right? The list goes on and on of great coaches in college football right now that learned under Saban. And for a while, the SEC, I think, got into this bad habit of just hiring Saban disciples, right? And not necessarily thinking outside the box. But it's in respect to who and what Nick Saban was and is for college football. Now, why did he hang it up? none of us probably will ever know the answer, at least coming from him. We're all kind of left sitting here wondering why. And I'm sure Nick Saban one day is going to do a documentary or write a book, and he's going to detail, right? His exit from Alabama, his retirement from college football, and he'll probably at that point shed some light. But I can't help but believe the way college football has changed over the last couple of years. I can't help but feel like that is a major factor in this decision for Nick Saban. Because here's the thing, guys. When you are someone like Nick Saban, when you're a competitor like Nick Saban is, you never stop loving the pinnacle. You never stop loving the end result. What you stop loving is the process. What you stop loving is the work. And I'm not sitting here saying that Nick Saban didn't like to work hard anymore. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is, did Nick Saban love the transfer portal? Did he love NIL? Did he love what that turned the game into? I don't know that he did. We actually know for a fact he wasn't all that fond of it. Did he love the expanded playoff? Nick Saban still loves the pinnacle, guys. He's a competitor. He no longer loved the process. What it took to get to that pinnacle. And I don't think Nick Saban is alone, guys. I don't think he's alone when it comes to coaches that aren't all that fond of working 365 days a year, 24/7, because that's what the portal and NIL has done to college football. From recruiting the high school ranks to now you got to retain your own roster. I think he still loved the pinnacle. I just don't think he any longer loved the process. And I don't necessarily blame him, guys. You know, this reminds me of when Steve Spurrier walked away, and I had the privilege and the honor of sitting down and chatting with Brad Lawing, former defensive line coach that had stops, of course, at South Carolina. He was at Michigan State with Nick Saban, worked under Jimbo Fisher, worked at Florida under Will Muschamp. And so I talked to Brad about this, and I talked to Brad about Steve Spurrier. Why did he retire? What happened? You know, do you think the way college football evolved in the recruiting, because we had heard stories the end of his tenure at South Carolina that Steve Spurrier, he wasn't all that interested in recruiting, guys. He wasn't all that interested in the nonstop work that being a college football head coach became. And I'm not saying Nick Saban was cutting from the exact same cloth if he wants to go play golf 6 months a year, but you don't think Nick Saban wants to be on the boat, be out on the lake 2 to 3 months? You know what I mean? Like, I think we would be naive to think that didn't play a major role in his decision. A guy like Nick Saban never stops loving the pinnacle, guys. What they do stop loving is the process. What they do stop loving is the day in, day out grind that it takes to get to that pinnacle. And that grind has never been more fierce and more intense than it is right now with the transfer portal and NIL. And I just think a guy like Nick Saban looked at it and said, you know what? I still love coaching. I still love the pinnacle. I no longer love the process. And I, for one, can't blame Nick Saban. Because, guys, being a college head coach now, I mean, I know, you know, listen, when you make a lot of money, there's no sympathy. I totally get it. When you make a lot of money, people don't give a damn. But these are still human beings. There's still this life balance to consider, right? They have families. They want to do other things that don't involve work, right? They're just like everybody else. And I just don't think these coaches have much of it. I mean, I low-key feel for these coaches that are having to go out, recruit a high school roster, retain their current roster, recruit a portal. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. But again, I don't expect anybody to feel bad for Nick Saban or any other coach out there. Now, guys, the ripple effect this creates in college football, I think it's going to be really fascinating to watch. Do we see other coaches, other older coaches, maybe consider hanging it up? Do we see, obviously folks are going to be, I think there's going to be agents working like, hey, your head coach might be a candidate at Alabama. We better up that contract, if you will. But what's so fascinating, guys, is we now enter this new era of college football, right? This 12-team college football playoff era, this transfer portal NIL era where the madness is only increasing, right? I see a video this morning of some NC State defensive back sticking with NC State. You know who's doing the video of like, I'm coming back? It's one of the guys with the collective. The collectives run the sport at this point. The collectives run recruiting. When it comes to roster retention or even high school recruiting, let's not fool ourselves here. Let's not fool ourselves. But when it comes to building the roster, the collectives run it. The head coach is just there to kind of facilitate a relationship, but like the collectives run things. Right? So, I mean, in this new era of college football, we now enter it without Nick Saban. We now enter it without a figure that has been around for ages, for eons. It feels like, at least. And, it's funny. We talk about who should be the commissioner of college football. I don't know if he'd be interested, but Nick Saban wouldn't be a bad choice. At least being on the panel. That seems like a guy's opinion that would be valuable, especially from the actual, football side of things. Now, where does Nick Saban go from here? Folks have talked about College Game Day, or maybe he becomes a personality of sorts. I don't know that he's that, call it for what it is. I don't know he's that captivating, but, man, if you have Nick Saban on a panel, I'm going to pay attention. You're going to pay attention. We're all going to pay attention, right? So it'll be interesting to see what his next move is, if there is a next move. Maybe he just wants to chill. And you know what? Nick Saban has earned that. He has earned it. Something else, guys, by the way, I forgot to mention before I go into kind of the next phase of this conversation, what it means for Bama, et cetera. Speaking to his greatness, guys, and I don't know if I think it was our good buddy Chris Marler who, funny enough, told me, he's like, yeah, man, I'm not coming on the show this week. Mental health week from me. Just taking some time. Cool. Take as long as you need. And then this happens and all hell breaks loose, and so much for that. I hope Chris Marler gets the piece he's looking for this week. But I think he made the point. I'm pretty sure it was him that made this point on social media that if you really want to get an idea of how great Nick Saban is and how dominant he was at Alabama, look at the games he lost. Look at the teams that beat his Alabama teams. And for most, if not all of them, those games are celebrated like they're championships. Those games are still talked about to this day. Tennessee fans will forever be speaking about 52-49. South Carolina fans still talk about Steven Garcia, Alshon Jeffrey, and Marcus Lattimore and what those boys did in 2010. Georgia fans still talk about finally beating Alabama and finally getting over the hump and why that was such a big deal. Like, Ole Miss fans still relish in those victories. Texas A&M and Johnny Manziel, that was where the legend was born, man. Take away all the numbers. That alone speaks to the greatness. That's the greatest compliment you can give a program or a coach. We're worthy of, when we lose, which is very rare, we're worthy of the opponent storming the field. That's the greatest compliment you can give any program or any coach. Because you don't storm the field when you beat a nobody. You don't storm the field when you even beat a somebody. You only storm the field when you beat the very best. When you beat the very best. So I think that's a great way to truly gauge how great Nick Saban was, is, and how dominant his teams at Alabama were. Now, What's next for the Alabama Crimson Tide, guys? In just a moment, we're going to dive into the top candidates for the Bama job, my thoughts on who's available, who should be the guy to replace the GOAT. This is going to be really interesting, though, for Alabama. Greg Byrne, their athletic director, I think Bama's going to handle this well, do a great job. But, guys, you're seeing, we talked about a ripple effect for college football. How about the ripple effect for Alabama that affects college football, which is, guys, Bama players have 30 days to enter the portal. Like, it is open season on the Alabama roster. So Bama's got to move with some pace. Bama's got to move quickly, if you will, right? But it's open season, man. I mean, you're going to have, I mean, God, you got Ole Miss basically trolling Alabama by, this news comes out, and I think it was the Grove Collective, posted something like, come to the SIP with the portal thing. Like, they know, we all know, the top programs, and even probably not the top programs, they're coming calling. I saw something this morning. Somebody said that, there's third stringers at Alabama that are better than some teams' starters, which is true. We know that's true. The depth at Bama's insane. It's just 5-star, 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 4-star. I mean, just 5 stars and 4 stars just stockpiled. I mean, they've been recruiting this way for over a decade, right? So Bama's got to move, and they got to move quickly to keep things in order and keep that train, if you will, from going off the rails. But with that being said, man, today is about recognizing the greatness of Nick Saban, the greatest of all time, the greatest college football has ever seen. I can't imagine being a Bama fan today and what that must feel like, and remembering his greatness and looking back on all of the great teams. And now the question becomes, who's next in Tuscaloosa?